Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage. News, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers.
Hey, Pro Football Playbook Podcast listeners. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. In this episode, we are at the AFC South Team Needs Show. So welcome in, Keith. How you doing?
I'm doing good. We are through 6 divisions. We got 2 left, and this is an interesting one because it's got a couple teams that are, thinking that they're, a contender for, not just playoffs, but a deep run in the playoffs, and a couple teams that look like if they can avoid being in the top 5 of next year's draft, they will be very lucky. And so there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, let's start at the bottom. I thought that they had a really interesting offseason in that they spent a ton of money. Jacksonville Jaguars finished with 3 wins in 2022, got a new head coach. Doug Peterson comes back into the NFL to take over this franchise at the head coaching position. I thought it was a decent hire for them, but I was a little worried because of Doug Peterson's exit with Philadelphia and Carson Wentz and how that all went. And then he's going to be paired with Trevor Lawrence. But then I found out that really it's probably Carson Wentz that had all the issues and the problems. And Doug Peterson just kind of got nailed there a little bit on the way out. So I think overall it's a good hire for them. It provides stability, a seasoned veteran coach with Trevor Lawrence there. I think it's probably about as good as you can get. And then they just signed just a ton of guys, threw a ton of money out.
Well, they had the money.
A bunch of players.
They had the money to spend, and no one was joining them if they didn't overpay. So Christian Kirk, a guy who's never had a 1,000-yard season, just got a ton of money tossed at him to come. Well, he showed up, and now they're going to give Trevor Lawrence a legit weapon. Now, is he number 1? I don't think so, but he's a significant upgrade over who they had.
Yeah.
And they're also able to get a guy like Brandon Scherff to come in and improve their offensive line. They're doing things right in that they're looking at how do they build around Trevor Lawrence, because he's got all the talent in the world, and you've got Peterson, who's an offensive coach, who's known for developing quarterbacks and being a quarterback guy. That's a good fit. Build around your quarterback, try and make steps.
Yeah, I mean, the list is extensive on who they brought in. Evan Ingram, the tight end. Fadukasi, the defensive lineman, I think is underrated as kind of a run stuffer kind of a guy. Trey Herndon at corner. Zay Jones, another wide receiver that they brought in that's got some upside. Cam Robinson, the tackle, joins Brandon Scherff there, and Darius Williams, the cornerback. It's a pretty decent group, and they, I don't even know what the overall value of what they spent, but it was head and shoulders above what anyone else spent in the league this last offseason. Yeah. But they still have a ton of positional needs going forward and looking towards the draft. They could use another offensive tackle, an edge rusher, I think a left guard, another outside kind of premier number 1 wide receivers lacking on this roster. DJ Shark left in free agency. You mentioned they brought in Christian Kirk and then Zay Jones. Really don't have a true number 1 wide receiver. So that would be a good look for them. And they've got a ton of draft picks. They've got 12 draft picks overall. A lot of them are 6th rounders, but they do have 5 good solid picks at the top of the draft, including the number 1 pick overall, Keith.
Yeah. Number 1 pick overall. They're going to get an elite player. There's a couple different ways they could go with this. They could go with Evan Neal and get that left tackle that is going to be a top guy.
Right.
Or they could go, Aiden Hutchinson and get that elite pass rusher on the other side of the ball. Both of them are options. And both of them will be a big upgrade and a nice piece to have. So it's just a matter of which one do they want.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's the edge rusher and the offensive tackle are the premier premium spots to get in the draft, hardest spots to fill at a premium spot with a premium player. And so I do think that it's going to be the tackle, or it's going to be the edge. All points indicate that it's Aiden Hutchinson there, but you never know what's happening. I think they could, I honestly do believe they could go a couple different ways there. They could also trade out of that spot. I don't see that happening in this draft.
Who's going to move up? That's my question.
Who's going to move up, and who's going to move up for what?
There's no quarterback to move up for. So unless you're a team that is in, the 4th or 5th spot, and you're willing to give up a lot because you think that Evan Neal is that much better than any of the other tackles, or you think that Hutchinson is such a huge upgrade over Kayvon Thibodeau that it's worth giving up, a bunch of picks. But do you really think that? I mean,
Hutchinson in a normal draft where you've got quarterbacks coming off the board first and so forth, and a couple other additional offensive tackle options, Hutchinson might be a 5th, 6th, 7th pick in a normal draft. Okay. And then they've got the 33rd pick and the 65th and the 70th. They can really do a lot of good for their franchise to get some good players, good depth, good rotational value, and probably at least 3, if not 4, impact starters that can come in right away and compete. And that's what this team needs.
Yep. My biggest issue with all of this plan and everything that's going on has to do with the fact that I don't trust Trent Baalke, their GM. I just don't.
Man, nobody does. Nobody.
And if you followed everything that went on when he was the GM of San Francisco, you wouldn't trust him either. So what are they going to do? I do think they're going to get an impact player at the top of the draft, but after that, what do they do? In the 2nd round and the 3rd round with those other picks. Honestly, I would be worried if I was a Jacksonville fan, just because his track record has not been one where he does a lot of good things there. I mean, there's a reason why he took over a team that was, a Super Bowl and then NFC Championship game, on either side of a Super Bowl appearance. And 2 years after he took over, they were bottoming out. I would be very
just because concerned. he didn't like the coach and he didn't like the quarterback. And
yeah,
that was it. All right, Jacksonville. So that's one of the bottom feeders, and again, we're probably looking at bottom 5 finish for this team, just because I think
they're a team that I think can rise above that. We didn't see a lot of production from Trevor Lawrence, but you still have a generational talent at quarterback. They added a bunch of talent, even though they had to massively overpay to get it. They did add talent, and they're going to be in position to add additional talent here. Yeah. They're young. They're much better at coach because their coach last year was a dumpster fire. And now you've got a guy who's got a Super Bowl win on his resume. And I think they're going to be better. This is a team that's probably not a top 5 pick in the draft team. They're probably, still a top 10 pick in next year's draft, picking 8 or 7 or somewhere in that range. But I think,
so you think they have 6 or 7 wins this year as opposed to 3?
Yeah, I think 6 wins is not out of the question for Jacksonville. I
can see that. Yeah, I think their offensive line is going to be the difference maker, and so. Yeah, I mean
the team that doesn't have a shot at moving up out of the top 3 is the next team that we're going to talk about.
This team is genuinely bad.
They have the 3rd overall pick in the draft. They were talking about Houston, by the way, for those of you that didn't guess that. They were genuinely bad last year and somehow spent this offseason getting worse. Although they did create a ton of cap space and a ton of draft capital with some of the moves that they made and trading away Deshaun Watson and getting all those draft picks for him and all that and all the things that they got for him, they're in position to start building a roster. But when we say start, we mean start because there's nothing there.
Yeah, I really tried to bring out some of the best of the what I could from their roster to talk about in the show. There just isn't anything there. I just wrote down team needs. They need everything. I mean, all the needs. They have all the needs.
Yep.
And they didn't really have a great free agency period. And Justin Britt was hired to play center. Malik Collins at defensive line. After that, it's just a hodgepodge. And you mentioned Deshaun Watson leaving. He didn't play a snap last year, so it's not like that was going to have a huge impact. But I think the draft gives them an opportunity of hope. And really, that's all you can have right now. They've got
5 picks in the top 80.
And 7 in the top 108.
Yeah.
Now, that's a significant amount of value if you draft right and if the draft falls to you correctly. So at number 3, you're going to get an impact player. We just talked about the number 1 overall pick. Number 3, Houston. Everybody really kind of assigns them an edge rusher in this draft. Trayvon Walker or Thibodeau's going to be sitting there, or you've got the best tackle available or the second best tackle available in this draft, which would be, we could literally talk about any position group. And so,
okay, let's say that Hutchinson and Neal are gone in the top 2 picks of the draft.
Yeah.
And you're looking.
I would do Iquanu probably.
So you're going to take the big right tackle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is that the greatest value there? I don't know. Is it the best player on the board? It's possible. Or you could say, Stingley or Gardner could come off the board early there. They've got Mills at quarterback. Are they going to reach for like a Malik Willis there at 3 overall? I don't think so, but maybe if they decided to drop back a couple of places, but who's going to move up? Again, you've got to have somebody that wants to move up into that spot, and this draft just isn't that rich in the top 5 for teams to want to really kind of move up ahead of other teams. So
I like the idea. I like the idea of Iquanu. He's a right tackle. He's not a left tackle, and you're like, wow, you're going to take a right tackle at 3, but he's going to be an elite right tackle. This guy's an absolute great road grader. He's a guy who's going to just put defensive linemen on their butt in the running game. And there are worse things that you can do when you've got a team that's bad and developing than develop a running game, right? And so to get a guy like him at 3, and then with that next pick, you come around, you can get one of the top wide receivers, because I think they pick at 13, right?
13.
And then, or you could go at that spot and get a defensive lineman, get a pass rusher, get another great piece, and you've got 5 picks in the top 80. You're going to be able to get one of the top running backs to go behind Iquanu and really develop a running game around that. They can do some things. But the reason why they can do so many different things is because they just don't have a lot there.
Yeah, and after this draft, they're still not going to have a lot, and it's not going to be ready this year. They're going to be back in the same spot next year, and
but they're going to have a lot of picks in that draft too, because that's the thing that happened with this Watson trade is they didn't get draft picks in this class; they got draft picks in the next class as well, and a first-round pick in the class after that. They have the ammunition to build a roster.
What do you think about building the roster this way as opposed to reaching for a guy like Malik Willis at this spot or at 13 if he's still available? And you've got Davis Mills, the quarterback out of Stanford. They like him, but he's not special.
I don't know. He actually looked better late in the year than I think anyone expected him to, and that was with not a lot of help around him, not a lot of talent, in front of him, not a great running game. They had Brandon Cooks at wide receiver, but not much else. He still looked pretty good. I mean, he looks like a guy that, is he going to be, one of those guys, a Russell Wilson, top of the NFL kind of guy? No. I don't think so, but he still could be better than a Kirk Cousins if you give him an opportunity to develop. He gives them the option to go, you know what? Let's not reach for a quarterback in this quarterback light draft. I mean, none of these quarterbacks are great. And so we don't have to go on. We've got a guy. Well, let's see what we've got. Let's give him another year. Let's put some talent around him. Let's build him a running game to help him out. Let's add a couple pieces to the defense to see if maybe we can get him a couple more possessions here and there, and then see what he's got. And we can address this next year, because if we're as bad as we think we're going to be in the top 3 of next year's draft, and we're going to be in position to draft a good quarterback, because there's some good ones coming up, like C.J. Stroud in next year's draft.
Wow. Interesting team. All right. This is the 2 teams that we're going to talk about now are 2 of the most interesting teams in the NFL, I think.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
particularly in this division, just because of the changes they've made and what they want to do as franchises, and they're really trying to maneuver. I think both clubs are, Indianapolis is not as happy at quarterback, and so they were trying to solve that this offseason, and they think they did, but it's only a short-term type of a solution. And then Tennessee it's just doesn't seem to get over the hump, but they had 12 wins last year. So I kind of want to see what your opinion is of the Indianapolis Colts first. 9 wins.
We'll start with that one.
They traded away Wentz. They got, which was amazing. Let's just start there. And then they got Matt Ryan, which, was interesting because I think Atlanta just kind of wanted to take advantage of the hot quarterback market, and so Matt Ryan was kind of available.
They're also rebuilding. They're rebuilding.
They were rebuilding, but that's what
you're not going to rebuild around a quarterback in his mid-30s. And so going ahead and trading and doing that. The fact that Indy got out of that deal with Carson Wentz and were able to get something for him is amazing. Honestly,
right.
They were able to go out and get Matt Ryan. They didn't have to, sell the future of the franchise for Deshaun Watson, even though they were in that running and they tried. They've got some pieces. They've really kind of done some things, but they've also seen some of the anchors of this team kind of erode away. You're looking at an offensive line that last year and the year before were both very good. Now suddenly you're like, maybe that's a weakness they need to address. I know he's not a household name, but Mark Lewinsky went from being a guy early in his career that was thought of as this massive bust. He really kind of has turned things around for himself and became a really good player for Indy. But he left. He's gone. They don't have a lot of depth behind him. They're really going to struggle at right guard.
Derek Fisher left at tackle.
Yeah, I mean, well, Derek Fisher he was like the weakest link of that offensive line, anyways. But Matt Pryor, is on is there. He's not the greatest guy either. And you're talking about a Matt Ryan who's not the most athletic quarterback.
That's the situation.
This is a team that needs to address that, and they need to address wide receiver. I mean, Michael Pittman Jr. is nice, but Paris Campbell would be if he was ever healthy. He's not. And the rest of that receiver room isn't scaring anybody.
Right.
Luckily, this is a draft where you can get a good wide receiver or two and not have to draft him in the first round. This is a draft where you can get a decent offensive lineman that can come in and play right away, and you don't have to be in the top 10 of the draft to do it. The draft kind of lays up nice for Indy to take what they've got, fill in the missing pieces, and be ready to compete.
I agree. I think wide receivers at the top of their list, offensive tackle, right guard, maybe corner, tight end. And it does kind of line up that way as far as value in the draft. Wide receiver, if they went wide receiver first at 42, there's going to be a plethora of options for them there. And then offensive tackle at 73, we've already talked extensively in a few draft shows about 3 or 4 guys at offensive tackle that might be available in that range. And then corner later and tight end later are great value areas of the draft where you can get guys in the 4th, 5th, 6th round to be able to come in and at least compete for you and add some special teams ability. This is kind of an interesting year. I don't see Matt Ryan as being a huge upgrade just because of his age and where he's at and the tools that he's got on this offense. And you take a look at that offensive line, I think it's going to kind of be a wash of a season for Indianapolis. I do see him at that 8 to 10 wins again this year. And I'm not. Do you think they're going to drop back further?
I don't think they're going to drop back that far. I think that Carson Wentz really held them back last year. I mean, this is a team with arguably the best running back in the NFL in Taylor. And if they can patch up that offensive line just to give, Matt Ryan that extra quarter of a second he needs to get rid of the ball and open up some holes, like this is a team that can really do some stuff. And honestly, Frank Reich is a fantastic coach. He's one of those coaches that I absolutely believe in, and I think that he can get more out of Matt Ryan than what we saw in Atlanta. And even in Atlanta, he was still playing at a high level, even with a roster around him that had completely deteriorated. So I think this is a better team than you're giving him credit for, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Is it enough to get past the Tennessee Titans?
I don't know. I would not bet on that. I'm not putting any money that they're going to get past the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans overall as a roster is really good. It's a really solid roster. My only real concern with them is under center.
So talk to me a little bit about that and the kind of offense that they run with Derrick Henry as their running back. Why doesn't that work for them optimally?
Well, I mean, it comes down to, at the end of the day,
I mean, they won 12 wins last year.
Absolutely, they did.
And Derrick Henry was out for more
half
than
the season.
Season.
The defense is great. Derrick Henry, who will be healthy and back, he is such a load, and just he wears down defenses himself. Really, for me, what I'm looking at when I think of all of this is there is going to be a time when, a cornerback falls down, a safety misreads a ball, and their game plan of running the ball, controlling the clock, playing good defense doesn't have them in the lead late in the game. And you need your quarterback to come in and not be a game manager for that in that last 3 minutes of a game, but to go win you a game, to go pick up the rest of the team where a fluke happened. And I don't trust Ryan Tannehill to do that. He is not as bad as Twitter and other people will make you think. He is actually a good quarterback. He's an above average quarterback, but he is not an elite quarterback. And I would be concerned about him. And if I'm betting money on the Titans being able to make a Super Bowl run, because at some point you're going to need your quarterback to do something. He needs to go win a game for you. And I don't trust him to do it. Although, I mean, getting a guy like Robert Woods and giving him, Austin Hooper at tight end, those aren't going to hurt. I mean, giving a guy more weapons in the passing game can only help him. But I still don't believe in Tannehill strongly enough to pick them as a Super Bowl contender.
Where do you see their positions of needs if you were to rank them 1 through 5?
Well, it's hard because their position, you say 1 through 5. I'm like, do they have 5 positions of need?
Well, I'm looking deep.
Strong.
Yeah, I think that they could probably use a right tackle.
I would agree.
And then maybe a receiver. Robert Woods was hurt, quite a bit. And then
but yes, it's true. They did sign Harold Landry to a big contract. And it's a solid roster top to bottom. It really is. They're a team with AJ Brown at wide receiver. Robert Woods doesn't have to come in and be the number 1. He can come in and be the number 2, which he hasn't. Which that's a good spot for him. You don't having him as the number 1 he can do it. I mean, he's good, but he also hasn't been healthy a lot. So they still got AJ Brown. They've got a lot of things. I would say if I was looking at this team and trying to figure out what I would do with them, I would say I would look at edge rusher just to get more pass rush. A cornerback would be nice. Then I would probably say linebacker, wide receiver, and tight end as the top 5 in that order. But none of those are like, oh my God, they have to go get a starter because they don't have anyone. Sorry, they have guys at all of those positions. If they were just saying, hey, it would be nice if we upgraded there. But they're good. They're good. They're deep. This is a really good roster. There's a reason why they won 12 games despite having their best offensive player miss half the season.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I agree. So what do you think they're going to do in the draft? They've got 26 and then they don't draft until pick 90 in the third round. And then after that, it's just a bunch of late round filler.
Yeah. This is a team without a lot of draft capital. I don't see them like at 26. What do you do? You're like, okay, we've got two top wide receivers. Do we want to use our only pick in the first two rounds at a receiver? Probably not. I could see I do see them looking, if there's a cornerback that they like, I would go that way. Or if there's an edge rusher that drops to them, going that way, and just continuing to build that defense. Because even though the defense is great, you can never have too many bodies, especially young, cheap bodies, as that. Because those guys are going to come up for contracts in the next year or two. And so being able to have young, talented options as a hedge doesn't hurt.
I see them going with David. They lost David Quisenberry at tackle. They lost Roger Saffold at guard. They brought in Jamarco Jones, offensive lineman. He's not going to be a starter for them. He's a swing guy. And that's really it. And so I think that they could restock their cupboards, on the offensive line. I really do. And I think at 26, they could get a good one. They could get a guy that come in and start for them.
Yeah. I mean, a guy like Tyler Linderbaum will be available if they want a center, and then they can, attack in that direction. I know they have Ben Jones, who's there and is a.
They just re-signed him too.
I mean, and a good player, but you can move him to guard. He's good enough and has the talent to excel there. And so you bring Linderbaum in, let Linderbaum play guard for a year and learn, and before you move him inside, or what you want to do. But he's a guy with enough talent to be a difference maker and will be available there. When you start trying to look at tackle, it's going to be a little harder. The guy from Boston College, Zion Johnson. I don't remember. Johnson, there we go. Who can play center or guard, actually would be a really good pick there, because he's more of a guard than a center, so he rather than Linderbaum, who's more of a center than a guard, who would be able to come in and replace Safford, and that would be really nice for them. So there's options there. I still think, given this team and its history and the way that they've built this roster around defense and the running game, that a cornerback or an edge rusher is still in play in that round one area.
Yeah. Yeah, a guy that would be a good value for them would be David Ajabo, the kid out of Michigan who hurt his Achilles at his pro day. Mm-hmm. And then he's fallen. He's fallen out of the first round even.
Oh yeah.
And so if you can get a guy,
he's not going to play till midseason. Right.
So if you could get a guy, well, I mean, Cam Akers came back after 6 months. I mean, who knows, right? I don't know. That's not normal. I know that's not normal.
Like, it's, Adrian Peterson came back from a torn ACL and was it 6 months, and that was
a Boy Mafe would be a great pick for them as well. A guy that can play, linebacker and rush the edge as well for them.
A guy that I don't know if is going to be on a lot of people's radars for that pick at 26. But would be a good fit for them, their scheme, and kind of where they're at on the roster, would be Nakobe Dean. Linebacker, off the line of scrimmage linebacker, sideline to sideline guy with elite speed and tackling, really kind of that middle linebacker that just anchors the defense. And now you're talking about a guy that it will be an elite player at a cheap contract, right in the middle of your defense. It fits what they want to do. It fits who they are and their team identity. God, I would not hate that pick.
I wouldn't hate the pick. I mean, he's getting a little bit of a rub because he's only 6 foot and he's 5'11" and whatever, and 229 or whatever. But man, he's got skill set that kind of trumps that size situation. And just a Georgia guy that comes in and commands the team and is your instant leader in the middle of that defense for a long time.
Think about how good that Georgia defense is. Or was, and how many guys on that defense are going to be picked in the top 50 of this draft, and then realize that Nakobe Dean was the leader of that defense. That all that other insane talent that they had on that defense looked to him as the guy in charge. Yeah,
that's undervalued. It really is.
Him going to Tennessee, like I said, I don't know if their fans would love that pick or not, but as an analyst, I would love that pick. I think he there just anchors that defense and keeps their identity going for the next 5-10 years. They can continue to be that defense and running game team that is dangerous and will go deep in the playoffs every year if they keep getting guys like that.
All right. Good show. Yeah. Nice. What do you think about this division? Do you think Tennessee's got enough to stay on top?
I do. Like I said, I think they're there. I think they're a team that gets in. They win the division. They're there. They're either a divisional or their team is going to make it to the divisional round, might get to the AFC Championship game. I think they run out of steam about that level because they don't have the elite quarterback play that you see from teams like Cincinnati, or Kansas City, or Buffalo. But when it comes to overall roster, it's a really good roster. They're in that top 4.
So they're a regular season win franchise.
Yeah, I mean, any team that doesn't have that elite quarterback, in my eyes, becomes they're a team that's going to build up all those regular season wins and then just not quite get there in the playoffs because you don't have that guy that can go win you that game when the game's on the line in the last second. I like Tannehill. I think he's underrated by a large swath of NFL fans, but I will tell you he's not an elite quarterback. He's a good quarterback. He's not an elite quarterback. And at some point you have to have that if you're going to make that run. There's very few teams that can make that Super Bowl run and get there without having it. You're not going to see many teams like the Eagles a couple of years ago when, when they had Wentz and Foles as their 2 quarterbacks in that year, and they still managed to make it work. Or the Ravens back in the day when it was Trent Dilfer at the starting quarterback, and there have been these teams that have done it, but they've been very few and far between. And if you're looking for sustained success and the ability to trust that you can get there and get over the top, you got to have that elite quarterback. Tannehill's good. He's not elite.
So what do they do about it? What do they do about it long term if they know that? At some point, do you let his contract run out and you make a move at that point, or do you try to trade him at some,
I don't know. They're in a tough spot because you don't win 12 games and then drop your quarterback, right?
No, it doesn't seem likely.
So you have to continue to build your roster and hope that you can become that 2001 Ravens team that won it with Trent Dilfer. I think Tannehill's better than Dilfer.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
You have to
overcome.
You have to become that. You have to become the Eagles of a few years ago that won with defense and the running game and good coaching and those kind of things. And they were able to make it work. And yeah, they ran into a weird playoff year where, the bracket kind of fell for them and certain guys got hurt on opposing teams. And, it just sort of happened. But at the same time, they did make it work. And so I think you just have to continue to double down on what you do well and just try and become that team that can make it work. Because unless you can draft a quarterback in round 3 or 4 and hit lightning in the bottle and have him end up being Russell Wilson, who was a 3rd round pick, and you can develop a guy like that and then let him take over for Tannehill, you're not giving up on your team and rebuilding in order to get that quarterback when your roster is this good. You just have to keep trying to make it work.
All right. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Keith. Awesome.
Okay.
Good information. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at Alvstad NFL, and you can find the show and all the podcast platforms and YouTube. We're all over the place. So find the show, listen, and subscribe. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Phil is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.